Next speaker is Roger Hangarter from Indiana University, who will be talking about improving science literacy through art.
Thank you, Jose. So art's a different thing than what we do most of the time, although I think everybody who does science is an artist because we have to play around an awful lot, and all the artists I've ever worked with spend all of their time doing research. They keep experimenting, but they don't think about science as anything in many cases. Some are getting better at this now. But what I want to do is show you some of the, I'm not going to walk you through some of the projects I've been involved in. This is one from a couple of years ago. We did a couple of series on campus at the Fine Art Museum called Imagining Science. And in this one, I had an artist, Margaret Delinsky, who would draw images for me, and we would put them in leaves using chloroplast movement, which is what we study in my lab, how light makes chloroplast move. And you can actually see the image in the leaf in about 20 minutes. And so we were doing that, but what I wanted was for the people who came to see these things to think about the science, not to think about her images in the leaves. So we ended up with touch tables and things to show them how it all worked. And you know, the result was that we did a survey, 80% or more of the people thought that we made all the images that were on the wall using Photoshop, even though they had all these tables to play with. And there's lots of things you learn by watching the people in your exhibit. For example, those were like giant iPads. You could touch them, you could draw on them and stuff. And there were age differences that were really dramatic. Older people, say 40 years and older, they would touch the thing. And if it didn't do something dramatic, they'd walk away from it. The kids would just hit it until something happened, and then they'd walk away from it. So finding that sweet spot is kind of hard. But anyway, I've been doing the science art collaborations for a number of years now. It probably started when I did my website, Plants in Motion, which a lot of you know about, which is just addressing plant blindness, and which is why I do all of this. It's really, in my motivation is to address plant blindness. And there I have time-lapse movies of plants doing things. And when people actually can see a plant doing something instead of just sitting, then they wake up to the fact that they're living things. But as I was doing these projects, I learned a few things. One of them is, as an acting scientist, the statistics say about 10 people read my papers. Sometimes that's only one person, sometimes it's 20 people. If we get 100 citations for a paper, we think that's really high impact. So my Slow Life exhibit, which was based on a lot of the movies and things, time-lapse movies on my website, has been seen by 3 million people. It's a different kind of impact. It's not impacting the knowledge base of, you know, our research endeavors, but it's getting it out there that plants are doing something, and plants are living things. They're not something you should just walk past all the time. The Imagining Science shows were only on our campus, and even there we had 8,000 people see these things. And the thing with these art projects is you got to come up with something where people want to see it because it's visually compelling, and then they want to understand why it's visually compelling. What is it about those compelling things that is happening there, and make it so that it walks them into learning science. So when they leave the space or the exhibit or the room or whatever it is, that they walk away knowing something about plants that they didn't know before. And to me, that's a success. If you can get somebody who didn't know anything about plants, didn't think of them as living things, and they walk out of the room and they say, okay, plants are pretty cool, I think that's a pretty good success. So there are a number of things to consider. I can't read this. That's really small. So if you want to do this, it's kind of a tricky thing. You have to find an artist. You have to find an artist that's got an interest in helping deliver science. Some artists, you can give them your images, you can give them your stuff, and they'll take it and they'll do something with it, but you can't learn science from their product. You have to work with them. It's got to be a real collaboration. Before you get going, you got to figure out what is your audience. And this is something that I discovered with Slow Life. When we tried to get funded through the NSF, that was a long time ago. When it got to the education program there, they didn't like it because it wasn't addressing children. it was for an adult audience, more adult audience, but it was really for everybody. But I wanted it to be for an adult audience because those are the people that have children at their homes and can talk to them and interact with them. It's throwing things, everything, all the resources into the young people. I think it's good to throw them to the young people, but not everything. Yes. So there are a lot of steps you have to worry about, where you're going to do it. You got to line all these things up. It takes a bit of time. You have to the really tricky thing is finding a good artist that's going to be motivated by the same motivations that you have. Your audience, you got to understand the questions you're asking. You need to assess these things. It's a little difficult to do this. You can do it informally, which is what we do in most cases. But if you're going to get funded, say from NSF, they're going to want a formal assessment, and you're going to have to actually include in your budget some money for that. It's good to keep records of what's going on, because as you work with the artists and the artists work with you, you both learn different things and you feed back on each other. And one of the most important things I think out of this is how it changes the way you do your own work, because you start to see your own work differently when the people are asking you questions that you never thought of before, and your colleagues who don't think that way don't ask you those questions either. And so it's a really incredibly rewarding experience. Tracking the audience size turns out to be pretty important, because that's that first slide I showed you with the numbers. The surveys that you can do, a lot of times it's just simple surveys. You can hand them something and ask them to turn it in at the end. You can stop people as they're going out the door and ask them if they're willing to sit for a few minutes and go through a survey and get at specific questions that you're trying to find out if you've actually achieved. And that's, if you can do that, you'll come out ahead. The professional project evaluators are really, really, really expensive. And I didn't feel like we really got much out of them. I think we got more out of our non-professional surveys, but it's not my job to decide who gives the money and that sort of thing. So that's all I have for you, and I think all of this outreach stuff is really important. And sometimes I think it's more important than what we do in the lab. And that's because of these numbers. You're impacting the world more. And the more you can get it out there, the better off everybody's going to be. Thanks.